There's something I've learned after watching hundreds of teams and friendships quietly fall apart. It never happens in one big argument. It happens in small silences, in the messages we don't answer, the tone we misread, the meeting we skip because it's fine. Maybe you felt that too. The slow fading of connection that no one talks about until one day the room feels colder and no one knows why. If you stay with me until the end of this video, you'll learn one small practice that can change that, a way to rebuild trust before it breaks and turn quiet misunderstandings into quiet peace. It's simple, human, and it starts with 7 short lines that reshaped an entire team. But before we begin, take a second. Write this in the comments, not for me, but as a promise to yourself. I choose clarity over guessing. Because that's what this story is about. How care sounds when it finally learns to speak. It started on one of those Tuesdays that feel perfectly ordinary. The kind where coffee smells right and keyboards hum like background music. No one expected a story to begin that day. But most lessons I've learned don't arrive with warning signs. They sneak in quietly, disguised as small confusion. We were a close team, good people, smart, kind. We laughed at the same jokes, celebrated birthdays, sent the occasional good job in chat. And still, every week, something tiny went missing between us. A message unanswered, a silence misread, a meeting canceled without a follow-up. No one meant harm, but by Friday the air felt heavier than it should, like a room where someone had whispered and forgotten to finish the sentence. One afternoon I sat at the table, half a cup of coffee in hand, listening to that quiet frustration that hides behind polite smiles. And I said, half laughing, half tired, what if we just agreed on what normal looks like? Everyone stopped. I remember the sound, chairs shifting, spoons clinking, and that pause that only happens when truth brushes the edge of conversation. I smiled. You know, our defaults. If I don't reply in a day, does that mean I'm fine or that I forgot? It was such a simple question, but the silence that followed felt like someone had just opened a window. That's how our first handshake defaults talk began. We filled a whiteboard with small human promises. If there's no reply in 24 hours, assume approval. If you need help, ask twice, once in chat, once in person. If someone cancels, they propose a new date. If it's urgent, say so at the start. By the end, we had 7 lines. No policy, no formality, just kindness written in plain English. We pinned it to our team chat and called it the handshake list. The next week felt lighter. Emails softened. Slack threads stopped turning into guessing games. And one of my teammates said something I'll never forget. You know what's strange? We didn't change how we work. We just changed how we understand each other. That's when it hit me. Clarity isn't paperwork. Clarity is care. And care feels like peace. A few weeks later, an email arrived. 4 simple words in the subject line. I found your note. It was from the new teammate who'd taken over my old role. They wrote, I thought I was the only one who felt this way. Thank you for making the start a little softer. I just sat there for a moment, still, quiet, humbled. For years, I'd chased impact through big projects and perfect results. But that one small thing, A few handwritten lines left behind had done what no presentation ever could. It turned anxiety into assurance for someone I hadn't even met. And in that stillness, I realized something powerful. We don't have to be there to make a difference. Sometimes the smallest acts, the invisible ones, echo the loudest. Funny thing, though, that note didn't feel like a goodbye anymore. It felt like a beginning. Because when you write for someone you'll never meet, you stop performing and start caring. You stop trying to sound smart and start sounding human. That's when I began writing forward. Not reports, not instructions, just little reminders, tiny bridges to whoever might walk the path next. At first, they were simple. A sticky note in a drawer, a line in a notebook, a quiet message tucked where someone might need it someday. And every time I left one, I felt lighter, because I wasn't writing to be remembered, I was writing to remind. We don't control who finds our words, but we can control what those words carry when they do. That's how legacies are born, not from applause, but from awareness. From those small moments when we choose to leave a place a little warmer than we found it. At first, it was just a quiet habit. A few words on a card, a sentence left behind like a fingerprint of care. But slowly, it became a way of living. At work, I began leaving small notes tucked inside drawers or taped to monitors. One said, "Here's what helps you survive the first month. Keep snacks in the second drawer. Don't book calls right after lunch on Tuesdays. And remember, the people here care more than they show." Another time, before heading out for vacation, I left a card that read, "If anything breaks, call Sam. If Sam's gone, reboot. If that fails, take a walk. It helps." They were simple words, but they weren't just about the job. They were about peace of mind, about saying, "I've been here. You're not alone." Soon, something unexpected began to happen. Others started doing the same. A new hire found one of my notes, laughed, and added their own beneath it. A chain of kindness written in pen and Post-its. Before long, every desk had something. A message taped under a monitor, a quote pinned to the corkboard, a reminder that someone cared before you even arrived. The office felt different, warmer, human. Like every corner whispered, "You matter." But the habit didn't stay at work. It followed me home. One night, after putting my kids to bed, I found myself writing again, this time to someone I hadn't met yet, the future version of me. I tore a page from an old notebook and wrote, "To the tired parent you'll be someday. Fatigue doesn't mean failure. Rest when you can. Laugh when you can't. Your kids won't remember your exhaustion, only your presence." I folded it and slipped it between the pages of a book. Months later, after a sleepless week, I found it again, and for a moment, it felt like hearing from an old friend, the version of myself who still believed in gentleness. That's when I understood. Legacy isn't built from big gestures or grand plans. It's written in small mercies, in the choice to care forward instead of just moving on. A few months later, I shared the idea with a volunteer group I was mentoring. They were a young, hopeful team, all energy, no roadmap. Every project felt like starting over. Every lesson had to be relearned the hard way. So one evening I said, "What if we wrote a list, not for us, but for the ones who'll come after? They looked puzzled at first. Then one of them smiled. And just like that, the energy in the room changed. We gathered around a table with coffee cups and open notebooks. Across the top of the page, we wrote, "What we wish we'd known in the beginning." Then we started adding lines. "Don't plan big events on long weekends. Always test the microphone. Bring snacks, always. Kindness spreads faster than flyers." When we finished, everyone leaned back, smiling. One volunteer laughed and said, "Feels good, doesn't it? Like we just left breadcrumbs for the next travelers." Exactly. That's what writing forward really is. Leaving a trail of understanding so the next person doesn't have to walk in the dark. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you write for the future, you end up learning about your past. You start to see your own journey with softer eyes. You realize how much you've grown and how much grace it took to get here. Because when you stop judging your mistakes and start teaching from them, your regrets turn into guidance. You can't control what comes next, but you can leave a light on for it. That's what these letters are. Tiny lanterns glowing quietly behind you. Even if no one ever finds them, their light still changes you. Because writing forward shifts the story in your heart from "I'm leaving" to "I'm contributing." In a world that rushes from one deadline to another, this is how you close a chapter gently. You don't drop the torch. You pass it. One day, I watched this little idea transform an entire department. They'd been through endless turnover, people coming and going so often that every new start felt like déjà vu. Someone finally said, "What if we start a book forward?" And so they did. Whenever someone left, they added a page, a note, a lesson, a small piece of encouragement for whoever would take their place next. It wasn't mandatory. It wasn't management. It was tradition. Months passed, then years. That notebook grew thick, its pages soft from being passed from hand to hand. Ink faded, edges worn, corners bent like the cover of a loved novel. And you know what? It became the most valuable document in the entire office, not for its data, but for its humanity. Inside were stories of first days and last days, tiny victories, hard lessons, quiet moments of gratitude, notes that said things like, "Don't panic your first week, it gets easier. The printer only jams when you're in a hurry. Laugh when it does. Remember why we started. It was never just about the numbers." When new hires arrived, that book was the first thing they read. It wasn't a manual. It was a welcome. And over time, something gentle but powerful happened. The department began to feel like a family, not because they stopped struggling, but because they stopped struggling alone. You could feel it in the air, that quiet warmth that comes from people who understand they're part of a story bigger than themselves. When you write for the next person, your ego finally rests, and your empathy wakes up. You stop asking, "How do I look?" and start asking, "How can I help?" That simple shift from image to impact, that's what makes communities thrive. And truthfully, the world could use a lot more of it. Imagine if every nurse left a note for the next shift. Room 214 likes extra blankets. Room 216 misses her dog. Ask her about him. Or if every teacher wrote a short letter for next year's class. They'll be wonderful. Just give them a week to open up. or if every parent tucked a page into the family drawer. To whoever finds this someday, this house runs on forgiveness. Can you imagine that world? One stitched together, not by perfection, but by care. A world held steady by people who simply thought one step beyond themselves. You know what's surprising? Writing forward doesn't steal your time. It creates it. Because the moment you turn your lessons into words for others, your mind stops clinging to them. It lets go. It breathes. I've seen people walk out of an office lighter just from writing a single note that said, "Here's what I wish I'd known." You can almost hear the sigh of peace that follows. Because closure isn't found in walking away. It's found in passing something on. When you practice legacy forwards, your days stop feeling like errands. They start to feel like heritage. Every task becomes part of something bigger. Every moment begins to mean a little more. Let me make this practical. If you want to start, you don't need a grand plan. You just need 5 quiet minutes at the end of the week. Grab a piece of paper and write at the top, "To whoever comes after me." Then tell them what you wish someone had told you. What to watch out for. What to laugh about. What not to take too seriously. You don't need perfect grammar or fancy words, just honesty. Because real legacy doesn't hide behind polish. It shows its fingerprints. Then leave it somewhere simple. A drawer, a notebook, a shared folder called "For the Next One." And do it again every few months. Each time your tone will shift. A little wiser, a little softer, a little more human. Because every time you write forward, you grow backward, toward more compassion for the person you used to be. Legacy isn't a statue. It's a rhythm. It's the quiet heartbeat of kindness moving through time. And here's the beautiful part. You don't need to know who will find it. Write anyway. Because someday, someone will stumble across your words, maybe long after you've forgotten them, and they'll realize they were never alone. That's the quiet miracle of legacy forwards. It turns endings into beginnings. It says, "I'm not closing this chapter. I'm turning the page for you." There's a story I'll never forget. An old gardener in our town kept a small battered notebook, pages yellowed, corners soft from years of use. Inside, he'd written notes about every seed he'd ever planted, which soil liked which bulbs, when the frost came, how deep to bury the roots. When he passed away, his neighbors found that notebook tucked in the corner of his shed. They used it to replant the entire community garden. And every spring since, the flowers still bloom right on schedule, just like he said they would. They call it Arthur's Guide. That's legacy. Not a statue, not a building, but a season that keeps returning because someone cared enough to write it down. Sometimes I think about that when I travel. Every so often I'll finish a book in a hotel lobby or on a plane, and I'll slip a small note between the pages. It always says something simple like, "If you're having a hard week, hang in there. The world is kinder than it looks tonight." Maybe no one ever finds it, but maybe someone does. And either way, I sleep better, because I've left a trace of warmth in a world that could always use a little more of it. That's the quiet secret of legacy forwards. It's not about being remembered. It's about remembering to give. It's not about permanence. It's about presence. When you start living this way, you stop rushing. You start noticing. You begin to ask yourself, what would I want the next person to inherit from this moment? And suddenly, you treat that moment with more care, more patience, more humanity. And in that simple shift, something beautiful happens. Your life stops being a race and starts becoming a relay. You pass the baton, not just the burden. You give meaning a chance to keep walking long after you've left the room. Because someday, someone will open your notebook or your drawer or your digital folder, and they'll find a note. Maybe it'll make them smile. Maybe it'll steady their hand. But one thing's certain, they'll feel your kindness in it. So tonight, before you turn off the lights or close your laptop, take a quiet moment. Grab a scrap of paper. At the top write, "To whoever comes after me." Then say what you wish someone had said to you. Fold it. Leave it behind. That's how you start a legacy that moves. One that doesn't end with you, but travels through you. Because the only legacy that truly lasts is written in kindness, folded into the ordinary days of living, and passed quietly forward from one open heart to another. Tomorrow may never come, but today is here, waiting for you to leave a little light behind.